hope you all had a delicious meal and some good conversations over the lunch hour. I am excited to welcome you to our first afternoon panel. My name's Amy Green. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the head of research at Hope Lab. Can y'all hear me? We're good? Yeah, I'm pretty loud. Hope Lab is a social innovation lab and really centered at the intersection of technology, mental health, and well-being for young people, particularly Black, brown, and queer young people. Also really focused from the historical start at Hope Lab at the intersection of research, design, and impact. And that's really what brings us here with these fine folks today. One of the things when you talk about product design and intervention, particularly for LGBTQ plus young people, is that it's really something that needs to be done in an interdisciplinary way. So I'm really excited that we have folks today from academia, folks who are from academia, now in industry, folks who are in design, playing around in academia, and folks who have really centered the voices of young people in the work that they do. And so I'm going to ask each of our panelists to start off by introducing themselves, their affiliation, any conflicts, and a little bit about what connects them to this topic of product design and intervention. So we'll start off here with you.
Okay. Hi, can we? Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is César Escobar-Viera. I'm assistant professor in psychiatry at the University of Pittsburgh, and what connects me to this wonderful group is one, first and foremost, I'm a gay man, very interested in understanding the influence of both social media on LGBTQ mental health and creating interventions that could be used within the environment of social media to improve that experience and make it safer for LGBTQ youth. My work centers around those two questions. We do a lot of observational work, trying to identify both positive and negative interactions that impact mental health on queer youth. You might say that we slightly focus more on trying to dig deeper in those positive interactions, only because there's so few research done in that area, not only in queer youth, but in youth in general. And from qualitative assessments and initial quantitative research, queer youth has been saying once and again that in spite of the negative interactions, the risks that social media represents in some situations, there are many positive aspects to it, like all the things that Juan and Trace already mentioned earlier today. And the second aspect is developing interventions. I focus mainly on chatbots of different kinds, trying to move into the field of this AI chatbots and thinking about different ways in which chatbots could deliver interventions for both, again, improving and social media experience for queer youth and make it safer, and to connect them with services and mental health support when they need it. Very excited to be here.
Hello. Good? Yeah. Hi. My name is Dr. Nikiforova. I use they, them pronouns and ani pronouns in Russian. I am head of clinical and research at Violet and am part of the Mental Health Technology Advisory Committee that got started by the APA 2 years ago. I don't know about. My personal draw is I'm queer. And I've really focused for most of my career on bettering queer health, and especially the way that clinicians approach queer health, in part because it's something that I have not been able to have. So it's a personal journey. And then lastly, I've been in health tech for the last 10 years, building technology around health and mental health and LGBTQ plus care.
Can y'all hear me? Oh, yeah, perfect. My name is Lionel Ramazzini. I go by he, they pronouns. So you can use anything as long as it's said with love and or respect. Pick one, pick both probably though. I'm a designer. I've been designing for over 10 years. I started off as an industrial design, designing digital physical products before realizing the Bay Area is expensive and switched over to digital products. Thank you for laughing. I'm queer, I'm a dog parent, happily married, first generation, my family to go to college, proud East Oakland resident, born and raised, and I just love making stuff. And I hope to tell you all some of the stuff that I've been privileged to build with young folks, sometimes not with young folks, and the ways that I have really, I think, created better products alongside youth, better programs alongside youth. And I've already heard a few that I've got to collaborate on with Deborah and Heidi. I've seen a few faces here, and I'm like, oh, pass me, touch that, that's so cool. Well, that's me.
Hi everyone, my name is Irène Mathieu. I'm an associate professor of pediatrics and a general pediatrician at the University of Virginia. And at UVA, I run a lab called the Wellness and Youth Social Action Lab, or the WAYS Lab. And we really focus on finding youth-focused, youth-driven, and youth-centered approaches and interventions to improving mental health, with a particular focus on LGBTQ plus youth and youth of color, and other youth who are otherwise have experienced marginalization or minoritization. And then I also collaborate widely with some of you all here in the audience, some of the organizers of this conference, and do work really, I think the reason I was invited on this panel, lending my voice around youth engagement strategies for research that is both intrinsically just trying to find out more about problems, but also trying to design solutions and products. So I'm very passionate about youth engagement. My other hat that I wear is I'm a writer, primarily a poet, but I do also write children's literature and creative nonfiction. And I think there's even a role for youth engagement and youth voice in children's literature, even when it's written by adults. So maybe we can talk about that too. But I'm really excited to be here and to be with you all wonderful people on this panel.
Perfect. I'm going to actually start off where the two of you, Irene and Lionel, left off, which is talking about designing with young people from the start. So Lionel, designer by trade, this is what you do, and this is something I should probably, so I'm an academic by training, researcher, and have the privilege of working with folks in design and learning from them. I am not a designer. I am a witness to what they do and a witness to the process, and I will tell you that there's so much from that process that I think researchers can learn. Some researchers are already doing the work, which is why they're up here again, not me. But I'd like to start at the beginning of the process. When you're starting an intervention, a product development, like what does the start of the design process with young people look like? Can you give us, let's start with Lionel, an example, and then we'll go.
Yeah, I'd love to. I think one, and this is actually from design school, so I'm going to give you one thing from design school, which is that constraints are our friends. I start every project thinking about our constraints. A constraint is a double-edged sword where I think innovation can truly shine. When we started INE.guide with Centerlink, our partners at Centerlink and our partners at It Gets Better, we weren't as sharp with our youth strategy as we are today. So we tried a few things, but we did look at our constraints. One was we have financial constraints. I'm sure many of us here can empathize with some financial constraints. We had people constraints. A lot of us that choose to work in nonprofit, research, foundational capacities are overworked, which means we also have limited time. I heard so much about you can't fill someone else's cup if your cup is just like, oof. that's not a bad thing. That forced us to get smart and realistic of what we could do. So it started off with like a youth board, right? Because that's usually the most simple thing, right? It's relatively low effort. But then we started realizing there was a few things that could have been better, and I think we realized that a youth board is great, but a youth board that doesn't nurture the careers and the lives of young people isn't going to cut it. And real investment, right? So for me, nurturing is how can you upskill and be upskilled by young people? Young people have tremendous power to teach us things. I've learned so much. Trace, Juan, I've gotten to, meet you now for a year. I've learned so much from both of you. And that's not just empty platitudes. Mentorship. I have not been able to do that with either of you, but I've been able to do that with some other young folks. And guess what? After a while, it goes both ways. They mentor you as much as you mentor them. You're actually getting something out of it. And your network, a lot of us have pretty rich networks. I came in here and I was like, oh my God, I've seen you over Zoom for 5 years, and now I get to finally give you a hug or a hello or a handshake. I would love to share that network with other young folks, and it can be scary. It can. We should say that sometimes. It can be. Not to everybody. I have some folks I would tell anybody, like, oh, talk to Amy. But there's some folks I'm like, oof, how do I prepare that young person, right? Again, and that's not what everyone here thinks, and that's okay. That's what I think. And the next one is how do we invest, right? Like, how do we help folks source jobs, look for opportunities, collaboration points? So I think one is, what are your constraints? And then look at those other two things. How can we nurture? How can we invest? And those should be your starting points. I'm not going to tell you, do this, do this, do this. I don't know how much money you have, how much staffing capacity you have, and how long you've even been in this field. But I can at least tell you, look at your constraints. What is the most I can do to nurture someone without destroying my own cup? And how can we tangibly invest into these young people's careers?
And yeah, Irène, if you
So speaking as an academician, as I think many of you who are who survive off of grants, you'll probably relate to this, which is that a lot of grant mechanisms require a certain level of specificity. But when you are engaging with community, whether it's young people or other adults, by inherently there is going to be some uncertainty about that specificity, right? You want to leave some openness, because if you as the researcher, the designer, the industry person have already decided exactly how everything is going to go and what the steps are, then where is the room for the engagement? So I got very fortunate a few years ago to get an internal research award that was a little bit less, required a little bit less specificity and a little bit more freedom to dream and innovate and collaborate with other folks. And so that was through our Clinical and Translational Science Award at the University of Virginia. And we had a really great infrastructure at the time to support researchers, especially people who were doing things that were a bit outside of the box. So I was able to utilize our community engagement core to do a community engaged studio, which is where we actually had people at the time whose job it was to liaise with relevant communities, folks outside of academia, patient populations and client populations who could then be recruited and paid to give advice to researchers to help us do our job better and form better questions. And that was the beginning of the process for me. Assembling a team, having a community engagement studio, hearing from both adults and young people about what would even be good things to include in this research, which at the time was very broadly mental health support in the community. Super, super broad research topic. But as we heard back from people, we started to narrow our focus more. And then we were able to learn ideas and strategies for recruiting youth to our youth advisory. Well, it wasn't really a youth advisory board. It was really a research team, an interdisciplinary research team, and an intergenerational research team. So we utilized youth participatory action research. And from start to finish, we wanted to have young people helping to shape and define the research question, the methods, the protocols, actually doing the research, analyzing data, and presenting and co-authoring along with us, and presenting and disseminating the data to communities and to non-academic audiences in accessible and creative ways. And so we did that by being very intentional from start to finish about bringing young people in and really challenging our own adultism and our assumptions that just because we may have some of the adult members of the team may have had degrees or experience or letters behind our name did not mean that our experience and knowledge was more important or more relevant than the young people's. And so there were several kind of specific strategies we used in our team meetings to make sure that we were really addressing adultism and making sure that we all came to this from a place of vulnerability. And I can give maybe quick 2 examples. One was that we really were on a first-name basis. So nobody called anyone doctor or anything. It was just complete first-name basis, regardless of whether you were a 16-year-old youth member or an associate professor, just first-name basis. Another thing we did was we showed up really vulnerably. And what I mean by that was at the beginning of every team meeting, we had a check-in where everyone had colored pencils and markers and paper, and we all just freehand drew or designed how we felt in colors. And it was completely open, blank page. You can draw whatever you want. And so we all started off team meetings by just talking about how we're feeling today, what we're bringing into the room, what we're bringing into the space, and then holding space for acknowledging everyone's different struggles, joys, triumphs, challenges, whatever we were bringing to the space that day in that meeting. And I will say that when you are creating a vulnerable space, especially if you're talking about mental health, and particularly with youth or adults who may have marginalized backgrounds in this particular moment, we wanted to make sure that it was a safe space. And so we had support not only from myself as a pediatrician, but also a clinical psychologist who was not part of the research team, who was available on call. So if anyone were to say something that made me concerned as a clinician or made any of the adults who had some training concerned for that child's safety, we had someone we could call to triage to help them think through what was going on if something were to come up in those more vulnerable parts of the sessions. And we actually never had to utilize that, but I think we were able through this process to create a space where people felt vulnerable, and we dismantled hierarchies so that everyone could really share authentically and contribute in a more even-handed way than a lot of research and design spaces traditionally are.
I think one of the hallmarks of what you both have indicated here is how central it is to really lead from a place of humility with young people and to really be in the work with them. And I always think how much we as a field would grow if we did everything in youth spaces that way. But this topic, right, when it comes to digital mental health, when it comes to tech, is a space that's so much different in terms of, I always say, I'm like, I can't go back and reflect on my own experiences as an adolescent in terms of technology. I can't rely on that. It's not the same. And I can't rely on my experiences right now. And so having young people there, and then we get into this topic, right, of LGBTQ youth and mental health and digital technologies. And so I'll turn to you here. César, what types of experiences are you able to do? Irène talked a little bit about it, to help young people as you're working with them, as you're developing interventions, as you're understanding social media use, to really develop that sense of trust so that young people let you into their world. When we're talking about vulnerability, it's like the intersection of LGBTQ plus identities and mental health.
So I'm going to tell you a little bit about a project that is still ongoing that we are conducting right now. The goal is to use, we collected social media data from donated by couple hundreds of participants, and we are trying to identify in this social media data with a machine learning approach what some of the potentially positive interactions are, as well as some of the negatives as well. We're focusing on social connections and loneliness, and because I'm old, and even though I use social media, my social media is Facebook, and we don't necessarily know what loneliness and connections are expressed like on youth social media right now, this minute. They know. So we are bringing this results of whatever the machine learning is saying is labeling as one thing or the other to this collaborative group that we formed a year ago. And with them, we've been through a process of, I would say, mutual training, because, yeah, we came with this idea, oh, we're going to train them so naive in how to interpret things. Little did we know that, yes, they not only are familiar with the definitions that we wanted them to be familiar with, but they also expanded those definitions of connections and loneliness applied to their social media environment so much that we ended up expanding all the labels and all the characteristics, the features of the things that the machine learning should be recognizing or labeling when it reads the social media data. So I think that that 1 year process that is going into 2 years soon already helped building trust, because we tried to approach this in the most humble way, because we soon realized that we didn't really know. We knew a couple of definitions, but they are the ones that know the nitty-gritty details of what that emoji or what that meme means in terms of supporting or not supporting someone else's mental health. So that was one thing that I think helped building mutual trust, and also explaining the research questions, the research process, very transparently, and really letting them know that this is something that we don't know how the answers are going to look like, but that we do know that we need their critical input to find out the answers. That is clear to us at this point. So I think that process of transparency, that process of approaching with humility, as it already been said here, was key, and it continues to build in that way.
One of the things that you mentioned and that I've heard reflected already is the way that you thought you knew what you were going to do, and in talking to young people realize, maybe this isn't quite how it is. And it's one of the things that I actually really love about the design process, which is it's built for pivots. It's built for the ability to have inflection points, to learn from your stakeholders. And so I'm going to go to you, Kate. You've been a part of a number of organizations developing a number of healthcare products, and I'm sure that somewhere along the way, you've been in places where you thought things were going one way, and getting that input from the design process that there's a pivot. Can you tell us about an example or a time in one of your products that you've worked in where really just that feedback was critical in helping you to take the next step forward?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think on my end, just in full transparency, most of the products that I've worked on haven't been directly to users of mental health or, let's say, LGBTQIA+ youth or patients. A lot of it has really been focused on clinicians or alternatively larger healthcare system. But that being said, I have advised multiple companies who do kind of user-facing. And one of the things that we were looking at, including with young adults, including LGBTQIA+ young adults, was it was a substance use startup that was interested in building clinical outcomes from the start, and wanting to actually collect some of the data that oftentimes they see startups kind of back into and try to do, retrospectively or do a retrofit. And one of the things that was really important was to be fairly expansive, and we wanted to include a lot of different things. And so I had developed this clinical outcome strategy. We had put together all these different measures. This is kind of like tales all this time, right? And including a lot of focus on social needs, demographics, making sure that we have everything. And then we had people review it, and of course it was immensely long. And so one of the things that we decided to do is having this tiered system of, right, this is what you collect during the intake, this is what you collect during the first visit, this is what you collect online, this is what they're able to do, through the EHR patient portal. And so splitting it up into those individual parts, I think is quite important. And it ended up, working much better, and clinicians actually wanted to use it. And I think that probably numerous people here have had that situation happen. And I actually want to talk about one other experience, which is less pivoting from my own work, on designing products and more so within products in the healthcare system. One of the things that I was working on, and I'll reference this probably in another question, was helping figure out how to better care route, so how to better match patients with clinicians. Right, and in that process, this is actually the current company that I'm at. The founder and I ended up starting this in part because we saw this really large flaw, and oftentimes, specifically when it's identity centered, we would have people call, I'm a queer patient, I want to get a queer provider, and a lot of the current mechanisms within the current healthcare system, including on the mental health side, is checkbox exercises or using lived experience as a proxy. And so we realized that there's this, and it was replicated. Insurance companies, provider organizations across, health psychology today. And so we really took a look at that and started ideating and figuring out how can we do something that is more caring, more honest, and more robust than what we currently have in place.
Fantastic. Lionel, you have a follow-up of a pivot here?
Yeah, I think I want to talk about IME again because there was two really great pivots that happened in the development. First, before IME even started, before we had a name for it, before we even had an idea, we had created this chatbot for cancer patients who were young called VivaBot. And I wasn't on the project, so I can't tell you the ins and outs of it, but we were really proud of the technology we had created for it. We were really proud that it was researcher-friendly, that it was youth-safe, that it was youth-friendly, that it was accessible on, at the time, newer and less lame platforms like Facebook Messenger. And at the time, that's what was cool. And we quickly mocked up some prototypes for it. So my colleague Josh, who's another designer, and I made some prototypes, and what we did is we made it so you could text the number, and the chatbot would appear, and you could text, and it can call. You can talk to it. This is before ChatGPT. We were really, really proud of it. There was this convening in Alaska. They were taking LGBTQ young leaders from across the country and from the local area to have a convening. So we were like, great opportunity to go take it to some young folks. It bombed. Nobody wanted it. They were like, this is terrible. And we're like, oh, okay, well, but what would be better? And not only them, but they said it first, so I'm going to give them the credit. They were just like, why can't you just make a resource that's easy for us to get? What if I don't know what question to ask you? And I was like, cool. And we got a lot of other feedback nuggets that were super powerful. We're going to go a year and a half to the future. We have IME, we have a domain. Deborah, we've had multiple meetings, we're all on fire. We have hired a development firm to help us with the back end. We have young people working on the UX, UI alongside of us. We're really proud, and we start taking it to different LGBTQ centers, specifically ones that have a lot of marginalized folks, especially a lot of folks that have a lot of BIPOC folks, so cutie BIPOC folks. And I started going to Oakland LGBT Center a lot with the things. I would print out the entire app, not too similar from this, in posters, and I developed a relationship with these young folks. They eventually got the design process. You can look up human-centered design and Post-its, and you'll see a ton of pictures of what the process can look like. And we did that. They were Post-it noting everywhere. It was awesome. And this young woman just so simply said, look, I just got into Cal. I ain't reading all that shit. And sometimes a good quote's a good quote. And I kept thinking about the back of my head, I ain't reading all that shit. And she was right. Because you know what I was thinking half the time? When I had to do a review, I ain't reading all that shit. Then I thought to myself, well, I'm getting paid, so I will. So it completely changed how we needed to make the app. We had taken a bunch of resources and we did digitize them, but it was boring. So after that, we really rethought about creating some features, get them to draw in there, get video content. We redid all of the content to be recorded, to have young people's voices in it, to have their videos in it, photography in it. We made it a more multimedia project, although we wouldn't call it that, because young people just kept giving us that feedback. And again, she wasn't the only one that said it. The Post-it notes actually clearly were telling us, I'm not going to read this. All the different LGBT centers that we, Allison, I think you had helped us connect with some folks in Los Angeles. I mean, there's folks in this room that really did have a hand in helping us build this. And we got the same feedback. But she had really made it succinct. So those are just two pivots where if you just really talk to young people and you gain their trust, they'll tell you what's on their mind, and they'll tell you what's on their mind pretty quickly.
Thank you both for those examples, and I think that they really serve as lessons for those of us who are trying to make something that's effective and that has impact. Sometimes, depending on a person's space and their resources, there's an idea, and it's going to work, and so it's go, 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 and to be able to stop and to get that feedback and to make those pivots is so important. I also want to talk, I'm going to aim this question at our two academics at the audience, César and Irène. There's a difference between product design and intervention when you've got a bunch of designers and you've got a bunch of resources and you've got a tech developer and you have access to all of the resources, maybe not as many as the big tech companies. But you all have found a way to do this in what I'll call like smaller resourced academic teams. Can you talk a little bit about how you've done that, how you've pivoted from the research model of here's my hypotheses and what I'm developing and I'm just getting to the end and I'm testing it and publishing it into this world of really diving into understanding your user and understanding how to make something that works for them?
Sure. I mean, the project with which I'm most familiar that our lab just completed, I will say the product is really the research that we did, not necessarily a tech tool. But I think to emphasize and underscore what's already been said here on this panel and earlier talks as well, collaboration has been super, super important, and especially interdisciplinary collaboration. And I think physicians, I'll just put this on blast here, are notoriously sometimes struggle with collaboration, and I think that's because our academic centers are designed to be very siloed spaces. I think it's much harder in academia to cross over what seems like a gulf to go from one department to another. But I, again, have to shout out some of the people in this room who are at the University of Virginia in different departments and different parts of the institution who have been really helpful mentors and collaborators. And so that meant creating a team where we had people with nursing backgrounds, public health backgrounds, EMTs, education, psychology, who were grad students, as well as young people who had some background in their jobs or their professional work or just their personal lives that were relevant to the research topic. And so I think really just collaboration in places and ways that you may not have thought were important or necessary, and being open to whatever collaborator is going to help move the project forward, even if there isn't a model for that in your field, in your discipline or space. And just, again, really kind of creating a team where there are as few hierarchies as possible, because I think when you eliminate hierarchy, you can really reap all of the benefits of that collaboration. You want everyone to feel like their voice is important and that what they have to bring to the table is necessary for the project. So that's also about team culture and creating spaces that feel welcoming to everyone.
Thank you for that. It really feels like the way you describe collaboration is sometimes collaboration can be a checkbox. We've collaborated with these people, let's list it, and sometimes collaboration can be the most fruitful way to get to the end result that benefits everyone in the end, and it really sounds like you've honed in on that. César, any other examples you have?
Sure. I mean, for me, I've been fortunate to land at an institution that supports a lot of this type of research in a city that is known for a large LGBTQ community with a lot of community-based organizations that serve LGBT youth as well. And forming these collaborations within the institution with other researchers interested in moving this field forward, as well as with some of those community-based organizations in Pittsburgh, has been completely critical to even advancing the goal of creating these interventions. And through these different collaborations is that we have been able to develop interventions that youth could potentially find usable and fun to use, although we are testing that right now, actually, so more to see in a year when we have the results of our trial. But yeah, those would be my
it's doubling down on
experience.
Collaboration.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think when I look at this group of folks that have come together here on this topic, it seems worth mentioning again the amount of collaboration that's possible, the topic of this conference about clinical care, industry, research, but really thinking of ways for folks across all those areas to work together towards these outcomes. And Kay, you kind of have all of them in one person. So you sit at the intersection, right, of clinical impact. You've gone and gotten mental health training, clinical training. You've got a PhD in psychology. You are in the industry world, deep in the industry, in tech, and you have a research and academic background, right? So how do we combine those things have impact? Can you talk a little bit about what that looks like, that intersection, and how you can maximize clinical research, product, industry to have impact?
Thank you. I didn't plan this, right? Like, I didn't plan to be that person, so here we are. I'm probably going to take this in maybe a bit of an unexpected direction, but I think one of the places where all of those intersections, like really at that center, that has been the most useful is in grappling with the fact that we have a capitalistic healthcare system. Late-stage capitalistic healthcare system, and there's so much focus on being able to extract money or being able to make money or being able to save money. And one of the things that I found is in academia, I think there is discussion of finances, but there isn't necessarily discussion of this person will pay this for that. Additionally, in my clinical training, nobody talked about money at all. And in the industry, depending on who you talk to, either people are only talking about money or not talking about money at all. And one of the places that I find myself currently sitting, and this is something that I grapple with truly on a day-to-day basis, the last 5 years of my work have been really focused on health equity, data infrastructure, trying to use data and clinical education and a number of things and try to put them in as many parts of the healthcare system as possible. And one of the things in order to do so, especially under the current pull of finances from Medicaid and the current pull of health equity language, is one of the things that I've been able to do is I have been able to use the research that we do, or the research that exists, to make a capitalistic case for why people should do this. One of the things that I've learned is health insurance is do like to save money and do like to make money. And one of the things that I've been able to show is if you provide care that is better, people will do better, they will cost you less, and you'll probably make more money. It feels tense and it feels weird to say that, especially in a room, especially in an academic setting, but at the end of the day, one of the things that I've truly, truly focused on is how do we continue to do the work, even with these constraints. You talked about constraints. The number one constraint, I think, for me is money. Right, and when I consider building products, I think that when I go to academic conferences, APA or other things, researchers come up to me and they say, "How do we get our app distributed, or how do we get uptake in use?" And I say, that's the $1 million questions, and there's literally companies that are giving millions of dollars for that, right? And so at the intersection of all of that, one of the things that I found is using the ability to speak this tech language, which honestly the bar is not that high. Use the ability to speak this tech language and be able to bring clinical best practices. Sometimes, quite frankly, stand up and be like, you literally cannot do that. And give the evidence in this interesting, different way, right? It's not just clinical outcomes, it's showing, it's convincing a group of people who are very money-driven to do better care. I'll use a specific example. I was working for an earlier version of the company that I'm currently at, and it was a queer mental health company. And through that work, for-profit, VC funded, we were able to fund a year of trans support groups weekly with a community member. The people didn't have to pay. The pay was quite good for the person running it, and it didn't actually negatively impact the business at all. And that was because we really wanted to have these ways of giving back. So I'm going to pause there.
It's such a fascinating journey that you've had, having all of those hats and being in that space. I think there's a lot we can learn from your wisdom in that. Speaking of wisdom, before we go to audience questions, I'm going to ask each of you for one piece of advice, one parting part of knowledge that we talk about multiple stakeholders, collaborations, right? So we've got academic researchers, we've got clinicians, we've got the tech industry, we've got funders, a whole group of people coming together around this topic of LGBT youth and digital mental health. Speak to all the groups, speak to one of them, but what's something that you wish those stakeholders knew about the type of works that you do? What's one piece of advice, information that you would have for those types of stakeholders? And you can pick all the stakeholders or one of the stakeholders. Maybe we'll start at the end with you, Irène?
Sure. I was thinking about this because I was listening to Nova's beautiful story about her son, Mason, and I realized that it really encapsulated one of the major findings of our qualitative work, which is not going to be earth-shattering to anyone, which is that something that's really important for young people's mental health across identities, across backgrounds, is agency. That's important for all humans' mental health, right? We want to feel like we have control over our own lives. And I think keeping that idea of agency front and center and making sure that the youth who are involved in these design and research projects truly have agency is important, because as you were saying earlier, there's a way to do this that's very checkboxy and performative, and sure, we collaborated, somebody was in the room, but it's very different to actually, as an adult, to close your mouth and let the young person say their opinion, and then also to follow that and trust them, and not just say, great, you said your opinion, now we're going to do what the adults want to do, but to actually trust that the youth may have better ideas, and even if the ideas are equal, if it's a youth-driven project, the youth idea should be what wins. And so really just keeping youth agency at the core, because the process matters, and we know that agency is important for mental health. So regardless of what happens with the product or the research, if you could provide a space for youth to have agency and to truly have power in these conversations and collaborations that are supposed to help them, I think that's a really powerful thing in and of itself.
Stick advice. Lionel?
I'll do a quick +1 to giving youth and your junior staff's agency. The second thing, to allow me to get a little woo-woo for a second, manifest or dream, that's another way of saying it, and don't be shy about telling other people what you've been dreaming, what you've been scheming, what you've been manifesting. There have been many moments in which I said, wouldn't it be great 3 years later? Oh, crap, we're doing it. I'm not saying it's a surefire win, because if it was, I would just say, everyone manifest, equality for LGBT youth every day. But, within your projects, within your ideas, manifest and share that manifestation, and create the space for others to do the same, because you never know who's listening, you never know who's there, and you might be sharing a dream with others that you don't know.
I was just smiling the whole time you were saying that. I think one of the things that I would love to impart that's been particularly important for my time building technology is just really doing a deep dive into understanding the United States healthcare system and the power structures that exist within it, the way that money flows, the way that data flows, the way that there's push and pull factors in why patients do a thing and why clinicians do a thing and why provider organizations do a thing and why health plans do a thing and why the United States government does a thing, although that one right now, that has been so important to me because it has made me understand what we're working with or understand what I'm working with, and in that start to understand how to navigate it. And also in that, I do have a piece of optimism. There are people doing tremendous good within this, understanding all of these systems and still working within them to be able to advance better care for folks. And it's been so incredible to meet them and work with them. And on top of that, it's helpful to know where to aim and what was most likely to succeed.
Okay. So I'm not sure if I dare to give any advice. This is more a reflection that I just want to share, and may or may not be helpful to anyone. I think that when, in my experience at least, when thinking about designing or developing an intervention or anything, as I mentioned, me and maybe most of us here are fortunate to be working at institutions where this kind of work is supported, or living in areas where LGBTQ people are able to live safely. Most youth, queer youth in this country don't live in areas like this. Most of our researchers may not be in environments that support this kind of work as the ones that we are at. And for those youth, the solutions that we are thinking of need to work as well. And a lot of times that speaks to all these multiple intersectionalities that LGBTQ youth have. Not only race and ethnicity, although that's there, of course, but also religion. I remember one of the panelists earlier talk about religion as a form of culture. It truly is. And these solutions that we are thinking of should contemplate them as well, because there are many queer youth growing in those environments, and for whom those beliefs are a big part of their identity. Also, there are queer youth across the spectrum of politics, and not all queer youth share liberal thoughts. There are a lot of queer youth with conservative way of thinking that we also need to develop our solutions or our interventions thinking about how this will fit their lives. So it's a huge challenge, I think. But I think that we need to be mindful of all of those intersectionalities and be more purposeful in including them in our processes.
And it always comes back to the engaging young people, but engaging all of the young people and all the intersections that might impact the work. So thank you for that, and thank you to the panelists for all their wonderful advice. I think we can turn it over for a few questions now.
I'm just curious about the collaboration with the YouTubes of the world, or creative people out there. I mean, kids turn to celebrities, social influencers, and all kinds of art, right? Music and maybe even writing. How do you collaborate with some of those organizations or people?
I can speak to that. So one thing we tried to do in our youth participatory action research team was to make sure the experience was tangibly helpful for young people. And so we had a guest speaker series where we invited people from a variety of disciplines and backgrounds based on youth stated preferences for who they wanted to hear from. And based on the topic of mental health, as you can imagine, a lot of these were folks who were in some way related to research, mental health, et cetera. But we also did invite some local artists, and we actually did a collaborative workshop one day with our youth where we made zines. And we all worked on it together. It was a really powerful way of expressing ourselves and expressing the work. And then we returned to that at the end of that 2-year project when we were thinking about our action and our community dissemination of our findings. And so we ended up creating 3 zines for 3 different audiences, parents, and that one was in English and in Spanish, one for youth, and it was sort of a collaborative, almost Mad Lib zine where there are prompts for the young person who's reading it to be able to reflect on their mental health. And then one for administrators, particularly school administrators and other sort of local policymakers. And we're distributing the zines now throughout our community. So that was one way that we try to bring art into the work, as well as what I said earlier about the drawing that we did at the beginning. But we really tried to be intentionally multidisciplinary and weave in arts whenever possible to our work.
I was really, thank you so much for the panel. I created a slide a couple of weeks ago where I was looking at like who gets funded around startups or just, like companies. And I saw that it was like 2% women, 1% Black founders in the last year, right? So it's like 97% of funding goes to men, mostly white men, right? It's really problematic. But then it makes me think like, how do we innovate in this space? And I'm curious if y'all have ideas about that, right? Like, it's one thing to create a product, it's a whole other thing to scale it and have a go-to-market strategy and make sure that it has traction. And yeah.
I'm happy to take that. I haven't announced my day job. I work at Hope Lab Ventures, so I think I have a slight thought on that. You're right. As an industry, we've done worse on this. In 2020, we actually invested in more Black or African American folks than we do today. What the F happened? But that's not helpful here. Here's a few things that we're trying at Hope Lab that I can tell you about. One is we're thinking about something called mission-aligned capital, which is an excuse of how can we start to, if VC isn't going to fund the types of companies and the types of innovators who start these companies, then are there collaboration with, family offices? Are there opportunities with celebrities? I mean, it sounds silly, but one of the most impactful trans surveys was done by an organization that was funded by Lady Gaga, right? I mean, and I'm proud that we collaborated with them. That's awesome. So one is, how do we look at small family offices? How do we look at impact investors and to get them to think about slightly different mechanisms? But how do we get people to actually give dollars? I mean, that's the part I'm still working on. So what I'm saying is we're experimenting with all these new ways of naming. How do we invest and who can invest in mission-aligned companies founded by folks who normally don't get funding? And I will let you all know next year if I get invited how that goes. But there's some potential, and I think there's some really exciting folks who I think really want to fund this, and I think there's some skepticism, if I'm being frank. So I'm trying to find the allies, find the community of folks who are trying to fund this. It's not been easy. And here, sorry, I'm picking up time. And the other issue is that we're pretty niche. Mental health is pretty niche within something. Youth mental health is even more niche. So I think that's the other thing is that from a more VC perspective, they're like, how do you increase this client base? And there might be times where you can say, we can do that and keep to our morals, and there are going to be moments where you say, we cannot do that. And I think that's what we've been trying to find is who are the community of funders who won't fund when someone says no.
Thanks. I just wanted to thank you all for speaking, and I think just the programming today in general has been wonderful. And I think a lot of times you can really tell who are the researchers, and I say versus the clinicians versus the product design folks because of the language folks use. The researchers use language like sexual and gender minority, which for communities feel very insulting, right? Because that's very much an NIH term. That's very minoritizing. And then you can tell the clinicians who are really talking about my clients, the people, the community. And then you can also hear the design language of like, who are the targets, the advertising language. And I just really appreciated that today it has felt very people-centered as opposed to target-centered, of like a group of people who are deficit, in a deficit-oriented perspective of who to fix or who to heal or who needs help. And I guess my question is, how do you stay grounded in that, right? Because I think you do have to, in some ways, shift your language to the different demographics of folks you're talking to. How do you do that in a way where you're true to yourself and the kind of moral and ethical compass of who you're serving, as opposed to get lost because you're in NIH world for so long that you start talking in this language that's about strategizing, getting reviewed, So I would just love to hear that, because I feel like this community so far today has really been able to straddle these multiple roles while being really attentive to the heart of the issue and the needs, as opposed to sometimes getting lost in that, right? Because I also don't want to talk badly about the folks who do that. I don't think that's intentional. But I think sometimes when you're trying to be subversive, you're trying to work the system, because the system is so capitalistic and exploitative, you kind of do that to them. You become so successful in that, institutionalized in that, then you start doing the harm by changing your language and the ripple effects of that. Thank you.
Okay, I can take that. This is a quandary that I have every 6 months, if I'm being honest. No, I think it's true. I sit with myself. My partner's heard this probably 2.5 years around now. Do I want to do this work? Do I want to... And honestly, I'm getting a little emotional about it. All right? Do I want to do this work in this way? And I think there needs to be, for me, a tremendous amount of honesty of why we're doing the things that we're doing. Why am I in meetings with health insurance companies? Is it because I want their money? Or is it because I want to convince them to do something that I feel they need to do to make care better for queer youth, for Black youth, whatever that looks like? So I think it takes, for me, it truly is like a crisis of faith every 6 months. Can I do this? Should I do this? Is this the direction to go in? And the conclusion that I keep coming back to is yes, right? Because if I don't, then those ripple effects of that work is not going to happen. But for me, the thing that I really struggle with is when people enter health tech or enter these spaces to be in those spaces, right? I have a lot of clinicians, how do I get into health tech? And I'm like, okay, well, what do you want to do there? And for me, I consider all of my work for the last 10 years more harm reduction. This is my harm reduction strategy for the United States healthcare system in my own way. I'm not the end all be all. Like, this is just my own thing. Honesty, accountability from other people, and truly that connection. Like, I'm doing this in part because I had terrible healthcare. I've had really traumatic experiences. So have my family. It's built for the people around me, or I'm working for the people around me. And if that ever changes, I'm leaving immediately. So in another 6 months, I'll come back to this.
Thanks so much for sharing that and for your vulnerability in going through some of the struggles that I think we all have as we're in different parts of this work. I think that was time for one. I'm looking at Bethany.
We are at time, so I was like,
I
was like not even keeping track.
I was like, I think we're at time. But please, everyone, a round of applause for our amazing panel. We get to the place where is by being yourself and talking to other folks and continue to have conversations outside of your discipline. And I don't mean like I'm a psychiatrist and I talk to an academic psychologist. I mean like talk to someone who works at a tech company and find that common ground being yourself. And I think that we can all do that here. So thank you all.